I want to bring in MSNBC's David Noriega in Tel Aviv. MSNBC's Vaughn Hilliard is at the White House. David Ignatius is foreign affairs columnist for The Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. Richard Stengel was Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs under President Biden, as well as being an MSNBC political analyst. So, David Ignatius, Netanyahu said earlier today, quote, Mr. President, you are committed to this peace. I am committed to this peace. And together, Mr. President, we will achieve this peace. But is it clear that Trump and Netanyahu mean the same thing when they talk about peace?
Well, they obviously agree on the broad goal. And today we're watching the joyous achievements of phase one, which is that the guns have gone silent, that the hostages have been released and are back in Israel, and that Palestinian prisoners have been released. But this peace deal really is about the subsequent phases that provide for what we call a day after in Gaza, a transition to non-Hamas governance, the disarmament of Hamas, the creation of a technocratic leadership that can guide Gaza, and most important, the creation with international help of a security force there that can make Gaza stable so it doesn't threaten Israel and also is a tolerable place for its people to live. All those things are still ahead. So this is, as I say, a joyous day. Trump's right to take credit for having gotten the world, Israel and Hamas to this point. But the hard work of implementation shouldn't be overlooked. Trump is going to need all the international support that's gathered today in Sharm el-Sheikh to help him achieve that.
Yeah, and Richard, what are you watching for in this Egypt summit? And what do you make of the fact that Netanyahu said, no, I'm not going to be there?
Well, Chris, first, I just want to say it's a happy day. It's hard.
Amazing. Yeah. Those scenes, you can't watch enough of them. I will watch them on a loop, right? It's just so heartwarming. We've talked to these families for so long.
Yes, it's hard to keep a dry eye when watching that. So that is a joyous thing. But, you know, there's an old media newspaper headline that used to cross out as an editor, which was now for the hard part. That is what we're facing now. David alluded to that. This is not a peace agreement. It's a ceasefire between two warring parties. And it's a ceasefire where the underlying causes of the war still exist. I mean, you asked about...
arguably have worsened.
Well, you know, part of the Trump strategy, I think, is that, not to get too highfalutin about it, but is that the performative yields to the substantive. Okay. That when he makes a big deal about something and says this is peace for the ages, people suddenly have to start trying to make that happen. That's a good thing. But in terms of actually ironing out the problems that caused this in the first place, they're still there. Hamas still wants the destruction of Israel. Bibi Netanyahu today said the military campaign hasn't ended. You know, there's a lot of celebration. It's great to have the hostages home, but the underlying elements that caused this in the first place are all still there.
Yeah, because David Ignatius, we also heard the president say today that, and I'm quoting here, Gaza will be demilitarized and Hamas will be disarmed. I mean, as far as we know, Hamas has not agreed to that. So are these declarations of the war being over dramatically premature or just part of the natural process?
Well, they're dramatically Donald Trump. So what he has accomplished, and we shouldn't slight this, is to get all of the major Arab countries, all of the major European countries, and the international community as a whole to back this vision of a transition to a stable post-Hamas, post-war Gaza. That's no small achievement. And he did that at a time when Israel was still wanting to go root and branch, house to house, and take Hamas apart. Simply having it on paper is a good thing. It's an achievement. But now the thing that's been hardest for Trump throughout the two installments of his presidency, which is the follow-through, now that begins. I watched him just in Cairo speaking with President Sisi. He was asked about the Board of Peace and who's going to be on it, and he turned to Steve Witkoff, his emissary, and Witkoff said, well, everybody wants to join. We've got a long list. Well, that's great to have a long list of people, but you're going to need to have troops on the ground. They're going to be in combat. The idea that every Hamas fighter is going to voluntarily give up their weapons just because this is a deal on paper has been announced, I think is unrealistic. So this force, when it's created, will take casualties. What happens then? How does the international community react? Those are the kinds of questions now that Donald Trump, as chairman of the Board of Peace, as he likes to call it, is going to be responsible for answering.
So, Vaughn, and you know this well, one of the criticisms of President Trump has been that he moves on very quickly, that he sometimes declares victory prematurely and doesn't want to do the hard work. But what are you hearing? What's his role now in keeping this ceasefire from falling apart? And what's his role in making sure that this peace plan does move forward?
I think what we've heard from the president in just the last hours is an acknowledgement of the role that these regional partners have played in advancing his own mission and agenda. It's hard to forget, if you go back to February even, when Bibi Netanyahu made his first of 5 visits so far this year to the White House, President Trump was talking about a takeover of Gaza and effectively American reconstruction. And if you fast forward over the course of 5 months, the way that conversation evolved, the way that the Qataris had become such central figures as mediators, to the point where just minutes ago you saw in that family photo being taken, you saw the Emir of Qatar on the president's left, and you saw President El-Sisi of Egypt on the right. It was only just a couple years ago that those two nations reestablished ties after an effective embargo was placed by Saudi, by Egypt, by the UAE and Bahrain on Qatar for the accusations of heavily financing and backing Hamas and Iran. And so to see where here in October of 2025, who was standing on that stage with the president, it's a remarkable scene, flanked by Giorgia Meloni, flanked by Keir Starmer and President Macron. And in this moment, we are expected to see here any minute this signing of this phase 1 agreement here. And so in terms of where the president sees and his commitment long term, I think he understands that he has built these relationships, unlike he did in his first administration, in a way that can advance his own agenda overseas. And with the threat of, essentially saying if it weren't for the bombing of Iran over the summer, that we wouldn't be able to be there to this position. That was his moment to show that America and his military had the ability and was willing to use its armed forces if it was necessary. And so to suddenly see where this moment plays itself, I want to let you listen to the president here just a few moments ago ahead of this signing.
The level of love, the level of respect for what it is, and it's peace in the Middle East, and everybody said it's not possible to do, and it's going to happen, and it is happening as before your very eyes, and that's why it's become so fascinating.
In just sort of the timing of these events as we've seen them, you just saw the president there with what we call the family photos with all those other world leaders. But then right before that, you saw every single one of them, including notably Palestinian Authority leader Mahmoud Abbas, who the president invited to come there to Egypt for this. One by one, they came and shook his hand. And the president, almost in a way that you are used to seeing him at campaign events with the big smile and the thumbs up. That's the sort of the portrait that he presented with every single foreign dignitary that he shook the hands with. And so I think it's quite a moment here ahead of this signing and then ultimately his remarks there soon after.
Really quickly, have we seen the document? What exactly are they signing?
Right. That is still the open-ended question mark. And I know over the course of the weekend, the exacts of the language and the extent to which, disarming of Hamas and the IDF's recognition of wholly pulling back out of Gaza at a certain time, a lot of that language was the big open question mark here. Of course, to the other's points, I think this is the sort of the open-ended question here for the president here as he leaves Egypt today after the signing is exactly what does that commitment look like from each of these regional partners.
All right, I want to play a little bit of what we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu today. This was during that special session of the Israeli parliament.
Mr. President, today we welcome you here to thank you for your pivotal leadership in putting forward a proposal that got the backing of almost the entire world. No American president has ever done more for Israel. And as I said in Washington, it ain't even close. Donald Trump is the greatest friend that the state of Israel has ever had in the White House.
They're also, Rick, giving him an award that's never been given to anyone who wasn't Israeli. As these negotiations go forward with the hostages now back, does Netanyahu feel empowered by the fact that the hostages are back, feel empowered by the deal that got done, and obviously looking to the guy who was sitting next to him as he was praising him profusely? I think that there had to be, I haven't done a word check, but he said Trump more than any other word, more than hostages probably in that speech.
I think that's the president's favorite word, actually. Bibi Netanyahu has been playing American presidents ever since he's been the head of Israel, even when he was ambassador here to the UN. I'm sure in some way, shape, or form he has said every American president has been the greatest friend of Israel of any American president. The question as to whether this empowers Bibi, and to your former question, why didn't Bibi go? I actually think that was probably diplomatic, which is that he would have been the skunk at the picnic. The head of Qatar, the head of UAE, the head of Saudi Arabia, the head of the Gulf states that are participating. Nobody at this point, just with the ceasefire agreement, wants to pose shaking hands with Bibi Netanyahu, the head of Israel, with 67,000 Palestinians killed in the last 2 years. So, if you're asking me, does this empower him? I'm not so sure. His popularity is now up. It probably will take a different leader of Israel to consummate this Mideast peace deal that Donald Trump is talking about. Again, Trump is putting the cart before the horse, saying there's peace before there is, and hoping that somehow that will help that happen. I would think a different leader of Israel would be the one who would cross that finish line.